Now like to turn it over to Dr. Andy Glatz, who is the CCRC Scientific Chair and the iTOF study lead for what's yet to come from the CCRC iTOF study. So Andy, turning it over to you.
Thank you very much, Will, Caitlin, and all the rest of the families, particularly to Carl. It's great to see you here. Hopefully we'll see each other in clinic sometime soon. My task over the next couple of minutes is to talk a little bit about what the future holds for both this tetralogy of flow study, as well as for some other issues for the CCRC. I think as you've already, sorry, my slides are not, let me try that again. All right, so as you've already heard from Brian and Athar, we have a really unique data set of data on nearly 600 neonates with tetralogy of Fallot, over half of them with follow-up data for more than 5 years. And so this is really going to allow us to hopefully answer a lot of questions outside of what you've already been presented. I'm not going to show you any data, but just to try to whet everyone's appetite for hopefully what you'll start to see coming out over the next 12 months with some of our planned ancillary studies. So one of the things that Brian alluded to is the use of cost as an outcome. We have the ability to actually link our data set with that phys administrative data set to actually look at costs, and we can compare costs from strategy A to strategy B, both for the index hospitalization and then in the first 18 months of life, to see if there's differences in costs. Because if other things are being equal in terms of clinical outcomes, cost may be a relevant outcome, and we're looking forward to exploring that. One of the other things we plan to look at is among patients who have an initial palliation, so among patients who go down the stage repair pathway, is there a difference based on the type of physiology that's imparted by the palliation? There's a couple different options. You can create a physiology, something akin to a BTT shunt, or you can create a slightly different physiology by doing a stent in the right ventricular outflow tract. And so we're going to look to see if the different physiologies seem to have differences in outcomes. We think growth is very important, and so we'll be looking at differences in growth as well as the types of feeding regimens required to get that growth, comparing strategy A to strategy B to see if there's any important differences. This has also been mentioned before by some of the families, but children who are initially born with tetralogy of Fallot and very small pulmonary arteries are potentially a unique group that may have different outcomes depending on which initial treatment strategy is chosen. So we are going to be looking at that subcohort of patients who start with small pulmonary arteries to see if there's differences in the growth of those vessels as well as other outcomes based on the initial treatment strategy. You've heard a lot about the number of catheterizations and other tests that are required for patients with tetralogy of Fallot. We know that exposure to radiation, particularly in childhood and infancy, can potentially have some risks. So we're going to try to quantify this and look to see what is the total exposure to radiation in the first 18 months of life, and is there a difference in the amount of radiation exposure required to sort of get you through one treatment strategy or the other. Obviously, neurodevelopment is a really important outcome. We have a somewhat unique approach to looking at this. We're actually going to be mailing out or have mailed out surveys with quality of life and neurocognitive function inventories to have patients, parents, and families complete so we can answer questions about how are all these patients that we started following many years ago doing currently, what is their current neurocognitive function, what is their current quality of life, and are there differences in any of those things based on their initial treatment strategy. We also want to look at the late outcomes. We focused a lot in what happens early on in the first year or 18 months of life, but we have long-term follow-up data on a decent percentage of this cohort. So we're going to try to get some longer term outcomes in terms of specifically the total reintervention burden over time, and some information on what their late functional status is like. And again, are there differences in any of those things based on the initial treatment strategy selected? Shifting gears a little bit beyond just tetralogy of Fallot, Chris alluded to this in his beginning comments, but the sort of next, the rebirth or rebranding of CCRC is going to be to create a prospective registry, and this really presents some unique opportunities to us. So currently, there's an organization called Cardiac Networks United, which can be thought of as either a sort of a network of networks or a registry of registries, where Cardiac Networks United can sort of assimilate data from multiple different registries and combine them together to do some unique things. So currently, Cardiac Networks United is made up of a number of registries, including a registry called PC4, which captures data on ICU events. There's another one called PAC3, which captures information from the step-down or ward or CCU. There's a registry called ACTION, which looks at patients with heart failure or patients who require a ventricular assist device. CNOC is a registry that looks at neurodevelopment. NPC-QIC is a registry that tracks patients with hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And PD-Perform is a registry that looks at data related to perfusion during an operation. So this constellation of registries, or this universe of registries, really captures a lot of information about a patient as they kind of go from one experience to the other. But there's some important things missing that we're hoping our registry can fill in, and that primarily focuses on what happens in the cath lab, which is not really captured in any of these registries, and then some longitudinal long-term follow-up. So we are now part of this network of networks, or registry of registries, and have the ability to then really track the patient's experience with heart disease over hopefully the entire lifespan. The initial plans for the CCRC registry is that we are creating or have created a module that looks specifically at newborns with a form of heart disease called ductal-dependent pulmonary blood flow, which basically means that there's inadequate pulmonary blood flow without a ductus arteriosus. This it does include a range of anatomies, including patients with single ventricle forms of heart disease, but then also importantly, patients with two ventricle forms of heart disease, including tetralogy of Fallot. So this will be our first module. They'll go into this registry and we'll be able to track them moving forward over time. Future modules will be coming down the pike. They have not been sort of finally decided, but the input and advice from our families and other advisors will be critical in making that decision. And then I'll end with one other new thing that's coming down the pike that has been really informed and inspired by the data both from this study as well as one of our prior studies, and this is the COMPASS trial. The COMPASS stands for a comparison of methods for pulmonary blood flow augmentation in neonates, shunt versus stent. This is a trial that is being run and sponsored through the Pediatric Heart Network, which is itself sponsored by the NIH. This will be a very unique trial. This will be the first ever multi-center randomized trial that compares a transcatheter intervention to a surgical intervention for children with congenital heart disease. Specifically, our goal through this trial is to randomize 300 neonates across 23 different centers in North America who fit into this category of ductal-dependent pulmonary blood flow. And subjects, babies, will be randomized to receive either a PDA stent or a surgical systemic to pulmonary or BTT shunt as a form of initial palliation. We will look at their outcomes over the first year of life, comparing these two different treatment strategies in the gold standard of a randomized trial. Importantly, in addition to patients who go into the trial, we will also create a companion registry, which will collect data on patients who do not meet eligibility criteria for the trial to learn important information on those patients, even if they can't be part of the trial. And the other thing that's somewhat unique about this trial is that almost all the data collection will be embedded within the existing registries of Cardiac Networks United, primarily with data coming from PC4 and the CCRC registry. And CCRC will have an important role in this trial. So with that, I'm going to end and thank everyone for their attention and presence, and have Will and Kaylin take over from here. Thanks.